Welcome in once again, Bucks Courtside Live. I'm Justin Garcia getting you set for the Bucks and the Philadelphia 76ers today here at Fiserv Forum on St. Patrick's Day. Last time these two teams met, remember this is the lone remaining team there of the top 5 seeds in the Eastern Conference that the Bucks still have games left with. The last time these two teams met, game number 4 in the regular season, all the way back on October 24th, and certainly a lot has changed for both teams since that matchup. Obviously, the big changes in Philadelphia, where just about a month after that matchup here at Fiserv Forum was when you saw the Sixers make that trade to acquire Jimmy Butler, and of course the move they made at the trade deadline as well, bringing in Tobias Harris. So some big changes made to the 76ers. Bucks with some minor tweaking as well. The biggest of those moves, the acquisition of Niko Mirotic, but we've seen guys like George Hill come to town since that game as well, and obviously the recent addition of Pau Gasol. Another thing to point out as well, DJ Wilson, and DJ is a guy we saw once again in Miami, which we'll get to that win in just a moment. But DJ Wilson and the component he has become in this system, especially on the defensive end for Coach Mike Budenholzer. So a lot of changes for both of these teams. And you heard guys talking about it yesterday in advance of this game. Really tough to point to any takeaways from that first game. Obviously, a game that the Bucks won. Again, October 24th, beating the Sixers 123-108 here at Fiserv Forum. But a lot has changed for both of these teams, so kind of difficult to pinpoint any takeaways from that matchup, given how different both of these teams are. That game, though, Giannis finishing with 32 points, 18 rebounds, 10 assists. He had a triple-double, 2 rebounds short of a 30-20-10. And the Bucks had 3 players score 20 or more that night, nearly 4. The 32 from Giannis, you had 25 from Chris Middleton, who started the season so hot. This was during that stretch. 25 from Brook Lopez as well, and 18 from Eric Bledsoe. Malcolm Brogdon, coincidentally, only 9 points. We point that out because obviously the Bucks will be without Malcolm Brogdon today, and we're not quite sure the extent of how long, given what he's dealing with in the plantar fasciitis. So certainly a big blow to this team, but we've touched on the depth that this team has and how that's a good problem to have when you look at guys that struggle to find some playing time because of how deep this team is. Now is when it comes into play for guys like Pat Connaughton, like Tony Snell, George Hill, thankfully, who's just returned from injury. Sterling Brown, you will get back momentarily now. It's going to be big for all of those guys. And you wonder, too, if we see any more tweaking given all the versatility that the Bucks have in that starting 5 with Chris Middleton, a player who can play in the front court or back court, and really the surplus of big men that you have now with, again, as we pointed to, a big performance from DJ Wilson, a spark that he provided to this team Friday night in that victory over the Heat, the acquisition of Nikola Mirotic. So a lot of options here for Coach Mike Budenholzer, especially as his team starts to get more and more healthy. Dante DiVincenzo, the rookie out of Villanova, another player we didn't mention initially, but that's another guy back into the mix now for the Bucks, and certainly with an opportunity presented now for the probably remainder of the regular season with Malcolm Brogdon on the sidelines dealing with plantar fasciitis. Before we do get to recapping that game against the Heat on Friday night, a couple of things worth pointing out there when we talk about plantar fasciitis. We've kind of seen this become one of the more popular and growing injuries in the NBA and really in all of sports in the last 5 or so years. And you go back to 2013 is when it felt like there was becoming an epidemic of plantar fasciitis. That year you had Marcus Camby dealing with it, missing about 2 months in the season. Joakim Noah battled it as well that season into the playoffs in a series between the Bulls and Nets, both Joakim Noah and Joe Johnson dealing with plantar fasciitis. Pau Gasol that year as well, a current member of the Bucks, back in 2013 dealt with plantar fasciitis. Cost him about 6 weeks, and it really took him about 10 games to kind of get back into the speed of things where his numbers matched his career and season averages in terms of whether it be point per game and rebounding per game, all that production, the shooting percentages. It took some time for him to get back into the mix of the Pau Gasol we were used to seeing. No deep playoff run that year. That was a year the Lakers were swept by the Spurs in the opening round. Joakim Noah, though, as we said, one of those guys that dealt with this in 2013, he talked about it around the time of the playoffs because that kind of hobbled him. Maybe not as extreme as what Malcolm Brogdon is dealing with, that it kind of cost him in spurts. And he touched on what it is. For those that don't know, Joakim Noah's quote, plantar fasciitis sucks. It feels like you have needles underneath your foot while playing, and that's basically what it is. You've heard doctors say it as well. It basically feels like you're being stabbed in the foot whenever you run, jump, any of that. So you can imagine how that's going to be difficult for an NBA player especially. So certainly well wishes and a speedy recovery to Malcolm Brogdon, who is dealing with something that, as we just noted there, is really picked up in the NBA. Damian Lillard as well, not 2013, but maybe one of the more prolific cases there. Damian Lillard dealt with this back in 2015 to a much lesser extent, only missed about 2 weeks and 7 regular season games for the Blazers. But that was the first time that Damian Lillard missed a game in his career. So seeing a lot more of plantar fasciitis, that's basically what it is. That's what Malcolm Brogdon is dealing with now. And as we said, certainly well wishes and a speedy recovery, because the Bucks will need him in the postseason. And, you know, you also feel bad because this is something Malcolm Brogdon went through last year as well. Not plantar fasciitis, but just the injuries, missing time right around this point of the season. A couple of weeks earlier, though, where he missed 20 games, I believe it was, dealing with injuries moving into the postseason. So you got him back in time for the playoffs last year. But as we pointed to with Pau Gasol, it did take him some time to kind of get back into the mix and up to speed there. So you feel bad, especially now that he's had to deal with this 2 years in a row and what he has done this season. Still in that 50, 40, 90 club. So it certainly seems he will finish the season in that grouping. 50% or better from the field, 40% or better from three-point, and 90% or better from the free throw line. And again, the company that he is in doing that, players like Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Larry Bird, Hall of Famers that we're talking about here in that group, only done 7 times before. 7 other players, I should say, had done this in NBA history. So a tremendous season by Malcolm Brogdon, and a big blow to the Bucks, no doubt. But as we had just mentioned, this is where you lean on the depth that you have to come up here and lead you into the postseason in these 13 remaining games for the Bucks. We'll touch on the schedule that they have as well, because a lot of favorable breaks here for the Bucks in these remaining games, and I want to look at what the defense has done of late as well. But before we do that, before we hear from Coach Mike Budenholzer, who should be hearing from in about 5 minutes or so, we'll also be joined by Katie George of Fox Sports Wisconsin. Before we get to that, though, looking back at what happened Friday night in Miami against the Heat, a historic comeback where the Bucks trailed by 20 points at halftime. If there was one thing you pointed to for optimism, it was the shooting percentage for both clubs. The way that the Bucks were shooting it ice cold very early in the game. The Heat were red hot. By contrast, shooting 50% from three-point at halftime, 6 of 12, 50% from the field. Seems like the Heat could not miss in that first half. And as we pointed to, 6 of 12 from 3 in the first half. They finished 8 of 22. So they went 2 of 10 in the second half, finished the game shooting just 41%. And the Bucks won the rebounding total as well, an area that they were trailing in that first half. So a lot of big changes in the second half. It stemmed from the defense. We pointed to DJ Wilson getting inserted in there. He played 9 minutes, and really the defense is what stood out the most. If you look at the plus-minus, he was a plus 11 in that game. But the defensive performance of the second unit and some big shots from some of the guys off that second unit as well. Ersan Ilyasova and Pat Connaughton, who, again, as we point to the absence of Malcolm Brogdon, you look at what Pat Connaughton has done of late, and you feel like this is a perfect opportunity for Pat Connaughton to step up and take the reins, and he had a big performance against the Heat on Friday night. 13 points in 25 minutes and 6 rebounds. That's another thing it seems like we're always talking about with Pat Connaughton. The rebounding numbers are really what jump off the page to you, and we've seen similar things as well from Dante DiVincenzo in his action this season. So the Bucks really blessed with some backcourt guys in the case of Connaughton and Dante that can rebound the basketball very well. But another big night from Pat Connaughton helping the team erase that deficit. And we said it was historic. Historic in the sense that it had never happened before in NBA history, that a team trailed by 20 points or more at halftime and won by 15 points or more. Now, the Bucks have had some big comebacks. You point to last year against the Timberwolves, where they were down by 20 in the third quarter, won the game, did not win by double digits, though. So the first time in NBA history that a team has trailed by 20 or more at halftime and won by 15 or more. It also snapped a 5-game losing streak in Miami against the Heat. The last time they had won there was January of 2016. So that's another big piece in the sense that this is a team in the Miami Heat you may see in the opening round of the playoffs. As we currently look at the Eastern Conference, Heat still holding down the 8th seed right now at 32 and 36. They're a game up on the Orlando Magic. So what we've seen, and I know we've mentioned this already a number of times, but you're starting to see teams settle into groupings now where the Bucks still hold that 3-game advantage over the Toronto Raptors. It's basically a 4-game advantage given they own the tiebreaker. And now with 13 games remaining, 3 games is a lot, basically 4 is a lot to make up there in that remaining time. So it feels like, barring the Bucks really doing something unforeseen here, they're going to be your number 1 seed not only in the East, but in all the playoffs. Meaning, if you get to June basketball, Game 1, and if it gets there, Game 7 would be here at Fiserv Forum. But the grouping we're starting to see, Bucks and Raptors really settled in there at the top 2 seeds. 3, 4, 5 is where we've seen these 3 teams lumped in basically all season long, and it hasn't changed. Only some jostling between the 3 of them. But right now the Sixers are your 3 seed, the Pacers the 4 seed, and the Celtics the 5 seed. A game and a half separates those 3 teams. Sixers right now holding the 3 seed. They're a half game up on the Pacers. They do own the tiebreaker with Indiana, though, and they're a game and a half up on the Boston Celtics, who really are that team that's lurking out there that the Sixers and Pacers, number of reasons why you'd want to avoid the 4 seed. The biggest is to avoid a potential 4 or 5, we should say, avoid that first-round matchup with the Boston Celtics. After 5 is where you see the drop-off. 7 games separate the 5-seeded Celtics and the 6-seeded Detroit Pistons. But even there in 6, 7, 8, those teams are bunched up a little bit. You're starting to see the 8 seed drop back. But the Pistons right now, your 6 seed, they're a half game up on the Brooklyn Nets. So the further along we go, the more it seems to be indicated that the Pistons and Nets will be 6 and 7, just a matter of in what order. And the 8 seed is really what's up for grabs. As we pointed to right now, it's the Heat that own that. They're 2.5 games behind the Nets for the 7 spot, so another case of maybe time running out. But as for the teams chasing the Heat, both the Magic and Hornets just a game behind the Miami Heat. And if we want to lump in the Washington Wizards, they're 3 games back. So again, time not on their side, but it's starting to feel like Bucks are going to be, or are getting, I should say, closer and closer to locking down that 1 seed. And now it's just becoming a matter of who is it going to be? Is it going to be the Heat, the Magic, the Hornets, possibly even the Washington Wizards? Though it would seem it would be one of those 3, the Heat, Magic, or Hornets, that the Bucks would face here in the opening round of the postseason. Big for a handful of reasons. Number 1, home court advantage has been big for this team all season long. We pointed to what the Bucks have done at home, 27-5 here at Fiserv Forum. That is the best record in terms of winning percentage in the NBA. The Denver Nuggets are 30-6, so they have more home wins. But the Bucks 27-5 at home now. And you look at these final 13 games, 9 of those final 13 games are at home, including today and Tuesday night against the Los Angeles Lakers. So 9 of 13 at home here for the Bucks. And 8 of those 13 games come against a team with a losing record. So a lot of home games and a lot of games against teams further and further down there in the standings for the Bucks, already with that 3, essentially 4-game lead over the Raptors for the top seed. And not only that, you're 52-17 right now. Warriors top seed in the West at 47-21, so 4.5 games up there on Golden State for the top record in all of basketball. Things are starting to fall into place nicely for the Bucks. Although, as we just pointed to, the injury to Malcolm Brogdon, the one thing that you would point to, as you know, people would ask, what's the one thing the Bucks need, or what do the Bucks need to avoid in the postseason? Each time I was asked the question, the one thing you would point to, making sure they stay healthy. This is a big blow. We're not going to sugarcoat it. It's a big blow that you have losing Malcolm Brogdon for an undetermined period of time. But the depth is where you'll really lean on now, and especially thankful that George Hill has made his return to the lineup. It sounds like Sterling Brown is moving closer and closer to a return to the lineup, and Dante DiVincenzo also coming back recently. So big blow for this team, but the depth is there, and now it's starting to get healthy with the exception of Malcolm Brogdon. So you have some guys you can lean on. You've got some big performances from players like Pat Connaughton in the past that you can lean on as well. So that is where you will look for the Bucks to lean on as we move forward here in the interim without Malcolm Brogdon. 76ers team, as we mentioned, the Bucks had not seen since October 24th. That was the last time these two teams faced off. Fourth game of the regular season for the Bucks. Very early into the season. But again, Giannis with a triple-double in that game. A lot of changes for both these teams. We told you one of them you're looking at right now, Boban Marjanovic, part of that Tobias Harris trade just in front of the trade deadline for Philadelphia. So you look at how the Sixers were constructed. That first matchup, it was a much deeper team where you had your two-headed monster of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, but a lot of role players and guys that played their part perfectly, like Dario Saric, nearly the Rookie of the Year in contention with Malcolm Brogdon a couple of years ago, and Robert Covington, one of really premier perimeter defenders in all the NBA. Both of those guys leaving town to bring in Jimmy Butler, and then you saw even more moves to bring in Tobias Harris as well. So it is a very, very loaded and talented starting five for the Sixers, but depth is really where you would point to in terms of what the Sixers are lacking. Right now, though, here's Coach Mike Budenholzer.
Especially with the starting lineup.
We'll start Nico Mirotic, kind of like we did the second half in Miami, and we'll just take it kind of day by day and see how it goes, and just learn a new group and some new rotations, and having George back, he'll be restricted again, but hopefully we can just be cautious and get him back where he's playing more with each game, and can fill those, obviously, the backup point guard minutes, and other guys, Pat and Tony, and hopefully Sterling's healthy soon, and we've played bigger groups, so we'll just kind of massage it a little bit and see where we go.
Do you think that's something that'll change game to game, or is that just going to kind of be your set starting lineup going forward here?
Well, certainly for me, historically, I tend to be more of the type that, pretty boring, pretty predictable. So we'll see.
I'm wondering, do you have some experience, dealing with players who have plantar fascia problems, and what's your experience been? Because I've seen, real varying lengths of layoffs.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I have a good memory on certain things, and other things just I think they go. I don't know where they go. So I'm guessing in all the years there's probably been some plantar fascia stuff, but nothing comes to mind, either in a specific example or how long it has or hasn't taken. I do think we've got a great medical group led by Troy, and they'll do everything they can to, most importantly, get him healthy first, but, on a timeline that, hopefully is sooner rather than later.
Just with that, I know he missed the Utah game, and you mentioned that it was, something that he deals with from time to time. Was this more something that built up over time that pushed to the MRI, or one incident from the other night?
No, I think there was an incident the other night. It's as we've, he's missed a couple games, and we've managed minutes and different things. So there's been something, I guess, maybe just kind of building there, and despite our efforts to keep it from anything more happening, something happened.
You mentioned that Mirotic will start, but I guess through necessity with some guard depth issues the last few weeks, you have played bigger. Does that give you some more confidence, I guess, that you can throw those lineups out and you sort of know what the results are going to be, or you've got some experience with that? Yeah,
no doubt. Playing the bigger groups. Even going back to the start of the regular season, we were, making Ersan the first sub and playing Ersan and Giannis and Brook together. And then, that Utah game where we started, pretty unique group, and just during different times, different subs, different rotations for different reasons. we've thrown out some really big groups, but we've also, thrown out some smaller groups. So we've talked about the versatility of the roster, the depth of the roster, and, this is when those things, help you get through.
I don't know if it was purposeful, but you didn't mention Dante when you were talking about other guys coming off the bench. Just what is the latest on him, and how is he doing?
Yeah, he's in another situation where we're kind of trying to figure out exactly, how to proceed going forward with his bursitis, his heel. There's just something in there, and hopeful that he'll be part of that group that can help fill in the what we're missing without Malcolm. But until we know a little bit more, probably just better to err on the side of caution with him.
Is he available today?
No.
Going up against Joel Embiid, I mean, Brooke, that's something where he might be banging up against a guy a lot. I mean, how nice is it to have kind of Pau there as an insurance policy now in some ways, where early on in the season it was sort of like, all right, are you going to shift small if Brooke gets in foul trouble? Just having those options. Yeah,
no, I think having Pau and having another, kind of that, genuine 7-foot size behind Brooke to throw it, a matchup like an Embiid is good. But I think, what we've kind of done all year, too, is sometimes counter, bigger guys with if you call 6'9" or 6'10" or 6'11", smaller guys, that maybe, athleticism, quickness, and activity and team. And, I think we see value in now having Pau, certainly that's more traditional size, length, but also what we've done for most of the years, throwing some kind of smaller guys and spreading out, playing even faster, and more movement, more activity, both defensively and offensively.
This is the first time you've been playing the 76ers with their 4 guys now. What are your thoughts on that group as you've seen so far with them together?
Yeah, I haven't watched them much, but certainly on paper they're, very, very impressive. And, going through the scouting report, a little bit of, some clips we'll watch before the game. They're good, but I guess Redick isn't one of those 4, so he's a big part of the scouting report. So I would say those 5, and they're obviously very, very talented. They've got a lot of size, versatility. So I think as a group we're ready to play them. Looking forward to it. All right, thanks.
Those are words of Bucks coach Mike Budenholzer as his team gets set to take on the Philadelphia 76ers today at Fiserv Forum, a matinee game, St. Patrick's Day here, a nationally televised game as well on ABC. So a big spotlight cast upon Miami and a big matchup here against the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. Just recapping a couple of things that the coach said there. So we kind of questioned what the starting lineup would be, and I know there was a lot of speculation on Twitter. We kind of danced around it as well. What would the Bucks do given the versatility of Chris Middleton and his ability to play in both the front court and back court? You heard it there from the coach. Nico will move into the starting lineup. So a couple of things that does, though. As we pointed to, Chris Middleton has the ability to play in the front court or back court. So now you have a bigger 2-guard in the back court along with Eric Bledsoe, a front line that is as big as any in the NBA really now with Giannis, Brook Lopez, and Nikola Mirotic. But what I think this also does is opens up some time for who you are viewing now, and that is DJ Wilson. And I know there has been a lot of clamoring for more and more from DJ Wilson, especially after that really spurt of action we saw from December until mid-February and the lift that he gave this team in that second unit, especially on the defensive end. I think this opens the door for more playing time for DJ. And one of the things that we talked about for the last, it feels like 2 or 3 weeks, was the opportunities will come. It may not be your time right now, but that doesn't mean there is no time for you. And you heard Giannis say that. You heard Coach Budenholzer say that. A handful of guys saying, we have all told DJ Wilson the same thing. Just stay ready. The opportunity will be there. You saw it in a limited action or limited period of time, I should say, where injuries opened the door for a DJ in one game earlier this season. So one of the things that they cautioned was just be ready. You will be called upon. Your opportunity will be there, and make the most of it. So now I think what this does is opens the door for more time for DJ Wilson, that you have Niko Mirotic in the starting 5. that means you're going to need some more bench time for guys like Ursan and DJ Wilson. So the Bucks certainly have the depth to go to there, and it kind of keeps the role the same for guys like Pat Connaughton and George Hill now that he will return and he's getting more healthy. You heard Coach Bud say they'll kind of limit his minutes, but he'll be leaned on here in this stretch. So it keeps things the same for those guys in the backcourt, gives a bigger opportunity to Nikola Mirotic. And let's just go back to last year in the postseason and think of what Nico did for the New Orleans Pelicans. That duo of Nico Mirotic and Anthony Davis and what they did, helping that team get past the Portland Trailblazers in the opening round. You know, we talked at times about this Bucks team and not getting it out of the first round since 2001. But in those instances, in those 8 playoff series they had been in, they've never been higher than a 6 seed. 12-90 is the record combined, East and Western Conference, since 2002. 12-90 for 6, 7, 8 seeds in the postseason. Well, one of those 12 came from last season's New Orleans Pelicans when Nico Mirotic was as big as anyone, really, the duo of Nico Mirotic and Anthony Davis in that series. So now a bigger opportunity for Nico Mirotic, and I think a much bigger opportunity as well for DJ Wilson after what we saw from him on Friday night. Joining us now from Fox Sports Wisconsin, Katie George. Let's go back to Friday night. You predicted that win, right?
Friday night.
Second half, you saw this coming.
Well, I changed my ink pen to green in the second half. I don't want to take a lot of the credit. Boy, what an interesting game that was. The tale of two halves. Miami, they always match up interesting, I think, against them just because they do such a nice job against Giannis in the paint. We haven't played well down there in quite some time. You know, I think that was the 5 straight games we had lost there. Finally, they were able to pull out, but I don't know. It was whatever was said at halftime was well said, and it definitely worked.
What was the atmosphere like in the locker room afterwards? Not only snapping the streak against the team that there's a good chance we're going to see them in the opening round,
Sure.
but the way they did it too, that historic comeback to first team ever down 20 at halftime and winning by 15.
It's amazing to me because the locker room after wins and losses feel the same to me. They are so even-keeled. It's not like they're in there jumping around, playing a ton of loud music after big-time wins. You know, most of them are just sitting down, icing before they get in the shower. They're just kind of talking amongst each other. I think you can walk in, and if you had no idea what the outcome of the game was, you'd have no idea if it was a win or a loss. And that's how they are on the buses afterwards. They're just very even-keeled, and it's a very professional team of, we're going in, we've got business to do, let's do it, and let's get out of there, on to the next one.
You know, you sat down with Pau Gasol, too, just as he arrived with the team, and he kind of touched on that, too, but just the fact that Pau Gasol and everything he had accomplished in his career, whether it be internationally or in the NBA, 2 finals or 2 championships, 12 times in the postseason, the Spurs were really, and are, that model franchise in the NBA that everyone points to. And here's Pau Gasol on the Spurs saying, this is where I want to be. I think that speaks to everything you just said.
Absolutely. And for me, you know, I didn't grow up. I was young when he was first getting into, just like, you know, DJ Wilson.
Yeah.
I think I did a hit. You know, Dante DiVincenzo was 4 years old when Pau went into the league, and he was drafted. So for him to look at Milwaukee and say, I want to be a part of that, I want to go there because they've got something special going on, just in all that he's experienced over his 18 years in this league, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And to hear the guys talk about Pau being here, they almost like it's reverence.
Yeah.
You know, hearing them refer to him and talk about him just being in the locker room, that's pretty cool. And to your point, I was talking to Jason Smith when we played in New Orleans, and he came over and he said hello, and I said, you know, how's it going? And he said, I just went from the best team in the league, you know, now to this situation where, you know, he says he likes everybody down there, but obviously there's some internal drama going on. They're not playing their best basketball. But he said, everybody asks me, what's it like in Milwaukee? How are they doing things? What's the coaching staff? How is it run? And he says, I always say, I mean, it is an unbelievable organization at this moment in time. So I think that's just a credit to John Horst, a credit to Coach Bud coming here and getting these guys into a system that works for them. I mean, timing is everything. Pau told me that. He said, everything has to come together at exactly the right moment, and there's so many different factors, and luck is a part of it. right now they feel like everything is coming together. Now, obviously, Malcolm Brogdon potentially being out for 6 to 8 weeks, that's a hit that you didn't want to see. But I still think that they've got a lot of things going on right now that are going really well.
I think something, too, that is, potentially helpful, I don't know how much, but Pau Gasol dealt with that same injury, and it was basically this time of year in 2013 that he had plantar fasciitis and came back just before the playoffs. Sounds like Malcolm, ideally you'll get him back for the second round of the postseason, but that's, another thing that I know Bud has talked about, too, in that we think Pau is going to help us in situations not even on the floor, that he's another guy in timeouts you can go up to and share his guidance of all these situations. The injury that Malcolm Brogdon has, I think that's another example of this.
I think he is going to be a huge mental help. And the fact that there are guys already in the timeouts that go up to him and say, hey, what are you seeing? What did you see on that play? And, Pau's able to kind of, he's, completely removed from this team the entire season, comes in, and he's got a fresh set of eyes on everything. So they're already tapping into him there. I think from a mental standpoint for Malcolm, to be able to use him as a resource of somebody who's already gone through this and how they were able to get back, and then coming back right in the midst of the playoffs potentially, how do you get mentally, emotionally, physically prepared for that? I think Pau can really help Malcolm.
That's what you just brought up too, I think is another credit to this coaching staff and the atmosphere that they've created here within the locker room, and just the culture here that, yeah, fine, we'll let Pau Gasol go ahead. You can run the huddle and players can come up to you, and basically letting him take the reins in situations like that and not feeling like you have to control everything.
There's so many timeouts, and so everyone to me is different. Coach Bud doesn't say a lot in all of them, and he doesn't need to. Usually speaking, he goes and he draws up the play because there are so many. You don't want to continue to hear the same voice over and over and over again, because when you do, as a player, you tend to kind of tune it out. When he needs to get on him, he does, just like that first quarter timeout in New Orleans where he jumped on him and said, are we going to get better, or are we just going to mess around for the remaining 15 games of the season? And obviously they responded well. Whatever he said at halftime in Miami, they responded. I just think that this team does a really nice job of knowing when to say things and when not to. And I've seen just in the last, 5 games, more players are starting to talk in the timeouts, whether that's Pau. George Hill is always extremely active talking to the guards. I mean, they've got voices, veteran voices that maybe they didn't have last year, and I think that that's really going to help us as we move forward into the playoffs.
The Jason Hill thing, too, the reaction that he was getting from old teammates that were greeting him at that game, you would think he had been in Milwaukee for 10 years. That, again, just talks to how tight-knit this group was, and still is, that they have here.
Well, I don't know, because this is my first season. I read different stories from other locker rooms, and I think to myself, I can't imagine if I was in a locker room and that was going on, or you're at one locker and somebody's talking crap about a teammate that's three lockers down. I don't know what I would do. I've been so blessed and lucky to be a part of this locker room because they are so enjoyable. You can tell they really care about one another. They're friends outside of the court, which I think that speaks to the chemistry, that speaks to the culture, not just within the basketball side of things, the culture of the Bucks in general. And that goes, to Peter Feigin, ownership, whatever it may be. The chemistry is really, really special. And I know, from my playing days, which is different than this, you have to have great team chemistry if you're going to do something special. And that's just one of those factors that Pau had mentioned that has to come together at exactly the right time. And I think the chemistry has been something that they have had this entire season. It's easy to see. It's stable. They don't have any drama. And I also think that that's because they don't have a ton of egos on this team. And Pau said that, I think, 5 days in. He said, you can tell Giannis is the superstar, but he's a humble superstar. We go as Giannis goes. And I think because he doesn't have some big superstar mentality or ego, nobody else does. Everybody knows their role. Everybody knows how they fit into this system, and it works.
That really starts it, I think, just the personality that Giannis has as the superstar on the team. But we've talked really ad nauseum, too, about how the job that John Horst has done, a tremendous job of finding the right pieces to put around Giannis. That's on the floor and off the floor, too, with just the personalities, and as we touched on, how tightly knit this group is. Even guys like we're looking now at Tony Snell. The personality that Tony Snell has off the floor, I think fans would be stunned to see the Tony Snell at practice and away from the floor.
With the two-piece McNugget and three-piece McNugget in his voice. Yeah, Tony's another guy. He fits his role well. He doesn't need to come in and drop 20 points. If he has a quiet 11, he's doing his job. He's helping this team. I just think it's a really special group. I've been, very lucky to be around them this entire season. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. People said you're going to the NBA. I thought that's the best athletes in the world with a lot of money and a lot of ego, and I've just been pleasantly surprised by that's not how this organization is run. Because all it takes is one guy, one player who has an ego or has a bad attitude, and it's crazy to see how one player can ruin everything going right. And right now, they don't have that. Yeah. And it's a credit to putting together the pieces, like you said. They don't just look for good basketball players who could work in this system. They look for good character guys, and I think that they have a really good group.
Part of that, too, is the willingness to get a pedicure on camera. Yeah. So where did this come from?
It was funny. I was in Orlando. We were in Orlando, I think, a few days before playing the Magic in the beginning of January. And Jim Paschke had actually sent me an article. It was Washington Post or Wall Street Journal or something. And it said, NBA players getting pedicures on the rise. And so I read it, and I thought, that's interesting. I wonder. And Jason Smith was actually quoted in it as a Wizards player at the time. So I was thinking about it, and I thought, I'll just ask our guys if they get pedicures. I knew Brooke was big in Brooklyn on getting pedicures because they'd actually have pedicurists come to their training facility to give the guys pedicures. And so I thought, why don't I just talk to him about it, and it could be a pregame hit, and I could say, hey, this is like a big thing, like our guys do it. And then as I was sitting there, I thought, well, hold on, I like getting pedicures. I love getting pedicures. If they like it, why don't I just take them with me, and then we can just kind of sit and talk and chat and get them out of their element of, it's not on a basketball court, it's not at the training facility, and let's see if we can get to see a different side of these guys. And so luckily the Bucks and Fox Sports Wisconsin was on board. Brooke was the obvious first choice just because he was into it in Brooklyn. I thought he set the tone wonderfully, and then I thought, why don't I have them choose the next guest? And so Brooke chose Sterling. Sterling went. And Sterling, to me, that wasn't like a funny, goofy, episode. But I liked it because you don't get to see Sterling in that element where he's talking about his niece. He's talking about his nephew. He's talking about his family. He's talking about Puma, why he chose Puma. You don't get to see that side of him. It was so enjoyable sitting there and just listening to him. For me, I love just going and sitting and talking to them. So I hope that people watching get that same kind of enjoyment at home.
There's been 2 instances I can think of with Sterling Brown. That, and after he named all 50 states,
oh my gosh,
and we caught up with him afterwards, those were the only 2 where you really got a peek behind the curtain there on Sterling Brown.
Yes, and I still have the gold toenail polish on my toe. I need to go get that fixed. He chose Eric Bledsoe for the next guest. So I've slowly been working on Eric. I don't want to say he's reluctant, but he said that he would get back to me. So we'll see.
You got to get the locker room to institute some type of fine. Like there's got to be a deadline.
That would be helpful.
Fines if he doesn't do this.
Sterling, I'm gonna have Sterling institute the fine for Bled, so that Bled has to go.
What if one of the guys picks Jim?
Jim's gonna have to go. John Horst. Dave Dean in the front office said John Horst really needs a pedicure. His feet are gross, so maybe we should get him going.
That's more questions on how Dave Dean knows
that. Right, because it's not like you're wearing flip-flops a lot in Milwaukee.
Unless it's just poolside. Just hangs out with him at the pool in Miami, sees what John Horst says he's working with there.
I know, but when they get the pedicures, I need them to play really, really well afterwards. And see, this is what happened. Brooks' episode aired, and obviously we don't shoot it that day of a game. I mean, it takes some time to edit, obviously. Brooks aired, and he missed, I don't know, 7 or 8 threes. People are, tweeting at me, oh, my, it's the pedicure. And I'm like, excuse me, actually, the day after we got the pedicures, he played really, really well, but nobody knew that because of the air date.
Need him to play well or, again, name all 50 states or do something like that.
The 50 states was
That's
insane.
Amazing.
There was no rhyme or reason to
in the
it,
states
no order.
that he started and ended on, too, with just
started with
no
Illinois,
rhyme or reason.
ended with Maryland, right? He's from Illinois, I get that, but I don't know. I was floored. And he didn't repeat. I would repeat so many of them.
Didn't stumble either, just one after another. What's game day like for you today?
Weird. Because we're not doing the game, because it's on ABC. It's a national game. So I went and I listened to Coach at 12:45, especially just to get an update kind of on Malcolm and where he's at. And then I just kind of sit and I enjoy, which is weird. I find myself, the Boston game was the last game that we were off because it wasn't on Fox Sports Wisconsin because it was a national game as well. And I'm just sitting watching kind of as a fan. and I find myself like so antsy and like into the game, and working games is better for me, I think, just to keep me like mentally focused on something rather than just watching in the stands.
Do you wake up and still, this is a game day, and go through the routines, and then it takes you a little bit to set in of, oh yeah, we're not doing that today?
Yeah, well, it was weird to me because when I came to the parking garage to park, all the spots were filled because I came later than normal because usually I'm here, 3-4 hours before a game. So it's just weird not working a game. But I don't know. I guess I should just kind of sit and enjoy.
You also have time, which, I mean, this has been brought up quite a bit. You have time to work on your Australian accent, or we could hear it now if you want to share it with us.
I wondered if you were going to do this to me. Kane, I saw Kane in Coach's interview, and he was like, are you going to do it all in an Australian accent? The thing for me is I'm fascinated with accents of all sorts. It does not just Australian accent. I have to be with a person of that accent to hear them, how they're speaking. Like Ursan, like I'll sit and I'll listen to Ursan talk, and then I can repeat and kind of then morph into his accent. I need Kane up here to like hear him to be able to kind of get my accent going. But there are some like key phrases in movies with accents that I like. So say if you were like, I need a Scottish accent from you, like give me a Scottish impersonation. Have you seen the movie Brave?
No.
It's like a Disney animated one. I think of like one line, I'll be shooting for my own fate. I blame you, stubbornness runs on your side of the family. So there I have like a key line. The key line gets me into the accent. Like once I start with the accent, then I can run with it because now I know how it's supposed to be said.
Ursan's your best, though?
Ursan is that Eastern European kind of rough accent. I had 3 or 4, for
teammates?
Uzbekistan. Yeah, I had 4 Russian teammates in college. So I was immersed into that accent all the time, and I only spoke to them in their accent and hated it because I thought I was being disrespectful, but I wasn't because I'm so fascinated by people's accent and the way that they speak. So I would say it's more of a Russian accent when I speak to Ursan like that, but I did it, I guess. We had a season ticket holder event, and so I pulled out the accent at the very end, and the fans seemed to really like it. Ursan did not so much, but Coach Bud was impressed.
Well, and that in itself is tough to pull off.
Yes, Coach Bud smiled, and the fact that he did, I was proud of myself because you don't see that often either.
Going back to that event, too, I mean, a lot of the takeaways that I heard from people that were there and that you saw on Twitter, too, was, and you're certainly well aware of this, Brooke Lopez should have his own show.
He is so funny. But so, like, he's not trying to be funny.
Right.
That's the thing. Like
It's oblivious funny.
Yes, he doesn't realize he's being funny or what he says is just so off the wall. Like the bat incident. I mean, that is probably one of my favorite quotes from this season about I wouldn't go try to let a bat bite me. I just make myself available.
Which we should have called him out on because that opportunity presented itself.
Oh, we did.
Okay.
Chris Middleton said he was surprised that Brooke didn't start running after the bat as Eric Bledsoe was running away from the bat. That was a funny moment in a very bizarre game.
Anytime you can get him talking about not basketball, too. I mean, obviously Disney's the big one and all the stories of him and Robin going through the Disney parks. Anytime you can get him down that path.
Disney's big. They've got a big comic book.
Halloween is very big.
Yes, they've got a big comic book collection.
Yeah.
Apparently that's worth quite a bit of money just because they've been collecting for so long. I've found that the Gasol brothers don't have as funny of a relationship as Brooke and Robin. I did ask Pau about Mark, and his response was not as funny as, say, what we would get out of Brooke or Robin. So. Well,
it's funny, too, because early in the year, where before I think people were really familiar with who Brooke Lopez is, a lot of the questions that I would see and get to are, do Brooke and Robin not like each other? Like, that's just the relationship.
That's just they play it up, I think, for the media. They're very much anytime we're in Chicago or they're up here or they're in cities that are kind of similar, they always hang out. They go to dinner. I mean, they're pretty tight. They go on vacations in the off season together. I think that they're a very close twins.
Last time we had done something similar and talked, it's been that long. You went to Lambeau for the first time.
Yes, I did.
What other Wisconsin things have you crossed off the bucket list?
Well, I don't think I should go back to Lambeau because that was the day that the coach
was.
Well, he was fired that day. So
maybe you helped.
Well, I don't know about that. It was freezing. But what a cool stadium. I mean, my parents went. That was kind of a bucket list thing we wanted to do. It was snowing, so we felt like we really got like the full effect of Lambeau Field. Wisconsin things that I've done. Sadly, I feel like I haven't done a ton because we've been so busy. Yeah. I know that I've talked to multiple people who are from here, born and raised, and they say that this is one of the worst winters they've experienced. That's crazy to me, and luckily we've been gone for, you know, that below 50 windshield factor. Did you see that?
I did.
Okay. Well, I didn't know if you were going to call me out for it, but
I was here for it. I also hope you're not okay. The snow is done with, because we're going to get snow in April or May.
Well, it was wild because people keep talking about the weather. You know, this is one of the worst winters, and I don't feel like I've really gotten to experience it. Thank goodness, because we've been gone so many times. But we arrived from Miami, I think, like 2 a.m. at the airport, got hit just like a pocket of snow. You were outside for maybe 30 seconds, and you were covered in snow, and then you drove 2 minutes up the expressway, and there was no snow.
Yeah. That's Wisconsin.
I just don't understand. It's wild.
Yeah, that's winter in a nutshell here in Wisconsin. And,
Literally.
you know, it's going to look great for the next couple weeks. 50, get close to 60,
and then
boom, you're going to get hit
right
with
back
6
in
inches of snow.
I will say, having the sun out the last 2 days, even though it is a little bit cold, I think these have been beautiful days. The sun makes such a difference up here. I don't know, in terms of like my overall mood, I'm so much happier just seeing the sun. So I totally understand people who say seasonal depression is a real thing.
Before we let you go, I know it's going to put you on the spot, but
It's making me
after
nervous.
the game, or you're doing something for Bucks.com or TV here, the one player, I say, Katie, you can talk to this guy about anything. Who's the player you're
About
picking?
anything?
Doesn't have to be basketball.
Ooh. There's a few. Probably Pat Connaughton. I think he's a good one.
Yeah.
He can talk to you about a variety of different things. Just an interesting guy overall. Or I would say Brooke. Brooke always gives you something off the wall that is interesting and entertaining, in my opinion. But those two guys, I think, those two guys. They're good ones.
Sticking around here to watch the game?
Oh, yeah, I've got a seat somewhere. I got to go find it. I'll probably be all antsy and nervous watching from the sidelines.
How many people stop you throughout the building?
Well, I wore a hat today. It's funny because I'll be like out and about. Like last night I was out to dinner and I get stopped and people say, are you the Bucks girl? Or I get, you look a lot like Katie George. Do you get that a lot? And I'm like, you know what? I do, actually. And then I say, do you think she's like good at what she does? Like, do you think she's doing a good job?
And their answer depends on whether or not you say
oh, yeah, and they're
her.
like, yeah, I think she's doing an okay. I'm like, I don't know if I like her or not. And they're like, really? I just want to get them on the spot.
Have you had anyone tell you no?
One guy said, you're much prettier than her. And I said, oh, thank you. I said, I think so too. I don't know what that means though.
Well, it should be a fun one here. First time these two teams have faced since
In
October.
a long time.
Fourth game.
Both teams look totally different. I asked Chris Middleton and Ersan yesterday, I said, do you even look back on that game, or is this like slate totally clean? And they said slate's totally clean because they're so different, we're so different. You know, their style, the Sixers' style of play has changed since their additions. Our style has remained the same, even though we've added some new guys. So it should be a very, very interesting game. And I think you can send a statement with this because so many people say, oh, the Sixers are one of the teams to beat in the East, and they're 8 games behind the Bucks, which is wild to me.
Well, especially now and playing a game without Malcolm Brogdon. If you win this, you win today, you win the season series. And with that, you've taken the season series against the top 4 seeds in the Eastern Conference.
Absolutely. And I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, too. Right now, they have beaten 6 of the top 7 teams that they could potentially face in the playoffs on the road. They've yet to go to Philly. Obviously, that game's at the beginning of April. But say they get a win there, they've beaten every single team in the Eastern top 8 that they could potentially face in the playoffs on the road. I mean, that's incredible because winning on the road is a huge deal, and you just have confidence when you go back to an arena. So for like Miami, if we see them in the first round, they'll go back to American Airlines Arena and say, the last time we were here, we played really, really well in that second half. They should be able to draw confidence from that.
Well, and, you know, after that Heat game on Friday was the end of it, but 21 of 30 on the road. and they went 16-5 in those 21 games. I mean, what they've done on the road to me is most incredible here, because you had to go back to 2001 for the last time this team had a winning road record.
Really?
And that was 21-20. So they
barely
got
made it.
there.
Well, it was interesting because all season long, Coach Bud has said, if you want to go deep into the playoffs, you have to learn how to win on the road. And from every guy that was on this team last year, they've said that was something they really struggled with last season, was they'd be up big, and then the fourth quarter would come around on the road in a tough environment, and they'd, boom, let it slip away like that. And we've seen them let some games slip away, a handful. But for the majority, they've done a really good job taking care of business on the road. And if you're a fan, you've got to have hope in that for the playoffs.
Well, and to me, that's the big thing, too, when you look at what they've done on the road. Obviously, all of the numbers out there and the metrics for their net rating and the point differential, all of that stuff, and how good it has been and how it rates to some teams the last 20-plus years. But then when you hear people maybe get down on the team for losing to the Suns twice, or that loss here to the Suns at home, then you look around the league and you see the Warriors losing to the Suns, and the Cavs beating this Sixers team that same night that the Bucks lost to the Suns. It just happens throughout the NBA. You don't go 82-0.
No, and especially at this time of the year after the All-Star break, where people kind of think things are somewhat set. They just want to get to the playoffs.
They can see the playoffs on the horizon.
They can
and this
see
is the time of year every coach hates.
Teams are getting tired. Guys are getting tired. They need breaks. This is kind of the time where everybody just in an organization starts chipping at each other because you've been together for 60-something games. I think this is just kind of that lull where teams slip up, and then we've seen that from teams from time to time as of the last 2 weeks.
Should be a good one today. Bucks and 76ers here at Fiserv Forum. 2:30 tip-off. It is a nationally televised game. And, of course, you can listen along statewide on the Bucks radio network. Katie George taking this one in as a fan, so should be a fun day for you.
Yep, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us here. Bucks and Sixers today. We thank you for tuning in. We're back again Tuesday night with more Bucks Courtside Live.